Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates. All I ask is that you think.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates, and welcome to another segment of the Just My 3 Cents podcast, a live, rapid-fire, interactive podcast where you can jump on with me to discuss issues of race, sex, and culture. We're the best in the world at doing that, so glad to be with you again. And I've been doing this the last few weeks. I'm keeping things easy for myself as we've been trying to get this video show kicked off. And thank you for those that have been jumping on. Again, the links, just so you know, is in the comments, whether you're on YouTube, Mental Dialogue YouTube page, or whether you're on the Facebook Live page. Make sure if you're on YouTube, you are subscribed to us, so you know when we do these, because typically, again, we try to do these on Wednesday nights, but every now and then I have to move it to Thursday nights. So just keep in mind, we usually will run this Wednesday or Thursday night as we get into our discussion. And tonight's is a unique, again, in an extension to what we've been doing on Saturdays, if you will. So Saturdays, this past Saturday, we were discussing, if you will, is public school education a benefit to Black children? And I had amazing guest, wonderful guest, Baba Amin, founder of the Huru Academy, as well as Chinwe Obajafor, board member at Colombo Academy. And so those are two well-known African-centered schools, one being online now, one here in the Atlanta area. And so I had these great discussions, so it prompted me, as I've been doing the last few weeks, even though we had this amazing in-depth discussion, made an on-air connection, one thing that I'm very proud of with the Mental Dialogue show, just to highlight that every Saturday morning, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We don't do the show just to be a talk show. We are there to connect people to our community, and we made a live on-air connection. So real proud of that opportunity where MOTEP Academy here in Atlanta and Colombo Institute should be linking up going forward, just thanks to us doing that show. But with that said, as wonderful as that show was, as you could imagine, when you're having an in-depth conversation, we always miss some things. And so there was one concept that I specifically wanted to ask about that I left off, and I wanted to dig a little deeper and share some of my thoughts. And I hate that I didn't get an opportunity to share it with my guest on Saturday. So I hope some of you, that are watching, will jump on and interact with me as you hear these thoughts, because I particularly wanted to speak about school choice. Not something that you hear a whole lot of, but if you remember, especially maybe around election time, you'll kind of hear that become a political narrative. And there were years where that was just a hot button issue in the political world, and still people fall kind of on different sides of it, typically politically. And so I wanted to share a thought on Saturday just to get a feel for what my guest thought, and I forgot to share it, so I'm going to share it here and wanted to get y'all thoughts on it, because it's something that I think goes missed in the school choice conversation, specifically for African-American children, right? So for the most part, if you're familiar with school choice, typically conservatives are for school choice and liberals are, to a degree, I would say, against school choice in the political narrative, if you will. And so there's always these two sides to it. You definitely can jump on here and give us your 3 cents, but I wanted to move it past the typical sides of it and just kind of show, in my opinion, when you take a political issue and divide it up, when you take an issue and divide it up politically, sometimes you can really miss the boat, and to a degree, maybe even go against your own self-interest. Like, that's something that always gets talked about in politics, right? How everybody accuses the other side of going against their own interests, which to a degree can happen, because for the most part, even if you agree with the majority of your platform on whichever political party you might be, myself, I'm a political independent, encourage more people to become independent, political independence, and especially Black people. I don't know how, in my opinion, how you could be tied to either one of them, based on the narratives that they push. But again, that's neither here nor there. But I say that to say that typically, there'll be an issue that maybe you don't line up with your political party in or whatever, and you say, well, I'll stick with them because I agree with the majority of it. But many times we'll find ourselves arguing against our own self-interest, if you will. And so here's an idea that I think goes miss when discussing school choice. So what I found over the years, I've been doing this radio thing. This is my third stint, if you will, on the radio, if you will, the Mental Dialogue Talk Show in particular. And I'm again now just trying this video podcasting, if you will. Something that I think this got missed over the years. I remember when I first started looking into school choice, wanting to understand it literally just from the objective side of it versus what each political side was saying. And I remember years ago, I was fortunate enough to have a brother by the name of last name Mills, Principal Mills. He had turned around, became known in the country for turning around Malik Shabazz High School in Jersey, or I think it was Jersey or Philly. I think it was New Jersey, turned that school around. It was doing terrible academically, and this brother became principal in his early 30s. And I was fortunate enough to have him on one of my shows years ago. And he was a big school choice advocate, and he was the first person that I listened to that made it make a lot of sense. And in particular, he was talking about the money that he wanted to be able to get his hands on if school choice was prevalent. But a lot of people in our community, if you will, disagreed with school choice. I definitely know my guest, Brother Pianki, was also a guest on my show, was a big school choice advocate, and he made that known on Saturday. And I hate that I didn't get to challenge, not so much to challenge the thought of it specifically just from a political standpoint, but the one thing I figured out, again, I see both sides of it. Again, the idea is a parent, if they really want to, in a sense, give their child an opportunity to go to a better school, whether that's receiving a voucher, whether that's competing in a lottery to get into a magnet school. So there's different ways school choice plays out throughout the country. And so there's people who advocate for that and say, hey, I don't want my child to go to the school, give them a school choice versus going to, maybe unfortunately, in some places, what's known as dropout factories, if you will, right? And so that's that argument. And then from the other side of it, it's kind of like, well, what about the kids that are left, in a sense, left behind and don't get a chance to get an opportunity to go to those better schools? Because there's always a limitation on who actually can, get bussed in or go to another district. So there's always these limitations on, in a sense, everybody getting a quality education, even if school choice becomes the wave, if you will. And another good argument that Brother Pianki makes is it challenges the public school to be up to par, knowing that they can lose students because they, in a sense, want to keep their tax dollars in the school. And so it kind of challenges the public education to stay up to par when there's competition, which is pretty normal in the capitalistic society. We feel like competition makes things better. So that's just a real weak synopsis of what you may hear politically. Here's a thought that I wanted to, again, share with my guest, and would have loved to hear their thoughts. And hopefully some of y'all will be willing to jump on. But there's one thing that's pretty evident to me, again, just trying to be objective, not trying to be on one side or the other politically. But there's one thing that school choice in itself is an acknowledgement of the fact that there are plenty of schools that are not up to par. And the reason that and that's not, that may seem obvious, but I'm going to throw it out from this standpoint. So the people that are advocating for it, right, that are the biggest advocates for it, they have this thought, because this is what gets pushed politically. They have this thought that the parents that care about their students will be able to take advantage of a school voucher or opportunity to go to this better school versus the one that's in their zip code. And so it's not that they're incorrect about a parent attempting or wanting to do that, but they almost say it as if all the parents wouldn't want their school children to be at a better school. I'm not advocating one way or the other. Just listen to me closely here. So I know it sounds like I'm stating the obvious, but school choice as a political issue, as a solution to maybe what's happening in public education, is full acknowledgement of the historical systemic breakdown of different schools that have for a long time have a long history of being failing schools. And so, uh, Brother George Frazier, for those who know that brother, he talks about uh, how is it even correct that your zip code can determine so much of your future quite often, to a degree. Now, obviously, individually, you can thrive anywhere, right? Individually, you could do that, but just the idea that your zip code determines so much, possibly bad education, lack of an opportunity for a job, which goes well into your future, well into your adulthood, possibly. That's the risk of you just literally being born in the wrong zip code. And so school choice as a political issue in itself is a full acknowledgement that everybody knows, the left and right knows, that there are some schools that are so far from being up to par. Let me show you how this plays out for the children, for the students. And so fully acknowledging that there are schools that are far from being up to par. But then we will turn around and at college admissions shoot down affirmative action policies at colleges as if, and which is basically disregarding the inequality that both sides have to acknowledge by the fact that school choice is a political issue. Like, regardless of what side you're on, there's no argument that coming out of high school, there's an opportunity, there is a unfortunately potential that based on the zip code you're born in, you could go to a great school or you could go to a dropout factory. It could really run to that full extreme. So both sides have politically accepted that that's a reality in our education system, and then we'll turn around and have an argument over higher education and affirmative actions process, opportunities about what's fair, as if there's fairness in the 12 years of primary education, which again, school choice in itself acknowledges the failure of the public education system, if that makes sense. And so that's the idea that I wanted to hear from my guest. I wanted to hear, what do they think of that? So even when you're a huge advocate of it and you're acknowledging, hey, there are some really bad schools around here. Well, like one of my callers called, Emil Bryant called on the show Saturday, and he said at the end of the day, for the most part, what parents don't want to get their children to get the best education. So we kind of throw this political idea as a fix because there's this also current narrative as if the parents who are not interested in vouchers or can't get a voucher or whatever the policy, each state does it kind of differently. It's different school choice ideas out there. So I don't want to, limit it to just saying there's one way to do it. But what I'm pointing out is we're pretending like there's parents who don't give a damn about their child's education, where if you went to a place that historically has had a dropout factory for the last 30 or 40 years, which now brings us all back around to how did people get in these neighborhoods anyway? When were these neighborhoods deindustrialized anyway? And so when that becomes a reality, there should be a full expectation that, not even an expectation, it's just understood that this is an issue. I got a sister that want to jump on this thing with me. Go ahead and jump on this thing with me, Queen. All right, hold on. Sam, if you're trying to get in here, it says something's not connected. You need to connect your mic, and I'll definitely add you to the stream with me, because that's the goal. I don't want to do this thing by myself. That's the goal. So jump on here and give us your 3 cents. But it says device not connected. So it won't let me add you, just so you know. If you could figure that out, maybe jump out and jump back in, you can get on this thing with me. But anybody, hit the link and am I making sense? That school choice in itself is a political issue, is a full acknowledgement that our schools are completely unequal at the primary education level. So why would we now actually not consider that's an issue for these schools and take the best students even out of those bad schools, if you will? And unfortunately, the reality, let's be honest, in a lot of the poor schools, we know that's a reality that unfortunately, that a lot of times That's our community, if you will. Not all the time, but I'm just saying, with that reality, why not set it up to take some of the best students out of those areas? Because based on the school itself, their curriculum is completely different. I remember when I was in high school, for example, and I'm from South Carolina, and so it's pretty like lower state. You'll see a lot of majority black schools in the lower state of South Carolina, and when you do school comparison or whatever, it's a huge difference in curriculum. I remember when I was in high school, I remember this one guy. I was like state beta club president, and my vice president went to a lower state school, and she's trying to jump back on this thing with me. Okay, let me get her back in here. Got it this time. Hey, what's up, Queen? Thank you for joining me.
Hey, Montoya, how are you?
Doing well. Let me just finish this little story, then we'll just see what you want to talk about. And so I remember my vice president for I was like the state president or whatever, but my vice president, he went to this lower state school. And so, on the side note, one day at lunch or something like that, we just kind of got talking about, where we wanted to go to college or whatever. And I remember, I think I was applying to the Air Force Academy, which I ended up getting into the preparatory school. I didn't get directly in, but he was a salutatorian in his school. And at the time, the way that South Carolina was set up, if you were 1 or 2, you could get a free ride to our state schools at the time, whatever. So because he was 2, he was getting a free ride. And as a high school student, when I found out his curriculum, he didn't have any AP classes. His SAT score was not even, get for those things wasn't even close to mine. And I remember at the time being like, man, he got a full free ride. I hope I get into my school. I ended up, fortunately enough, getting a full free ride. But at the time, he knew he was guaranteed to have one. But when I saw what he took in high school, I was like, wow, his curriculum is not really. I was like, man, I'd have made straight A's with his curriculum just from, thinking about it. And I'm just kind of pointing out that in the same state, upstate versus lower state, his school was a totally different curriculum. And he's, I was actually jealous of him actually being able to take advantage of affirmative action in a way that I didn't know I would be able to take advantage of it. Now, luckily, I can admit, now that I know how the academy works, I was able to take advantage of it, but at the time I didn't know it. So I'm just kind of highlighting it was a complete difference in education, and school choice fully acknowledges that. What your thoughts, Queen, on what I've been talking about? Just love to get your 3 cents on it. Thank you for coming on with me, Sam.
Hi, for school choice. I heard you say as far as it being more competitive and stuff. I came on to talk more about the public schools and the different type of school systems that I'm familiar with. I'm really not that familiar with school choice, though. So some of the things that you were talking about as far as making them more competitive, I can say I'm making them more competitive because if you have a lot of failing schools, if another type of school offers, another option, then it's going to be better for the students. However, you still have to be able to see if the school is going to be a performing school also. So take for instance, you have the charter schools, you have the Catholic schools, you have private schools, you have different schools. So it's based on your research on the school and if what the parents really kind of what they're looking for the student. Public schools are going to be a little bit different because they're pretty much free to everybody. The charter schools came in, but some of those were failing too. So what do you do if you still have some failing schools? So even if you have the free choice to pick a school, if the schools are failing, then what's the difference?
Well, I would think, I don't know how simple it is because I haven't been in this position myself, but I would think, for those who advocate school choice, if you will, well, you're going to pick the schools that you've done the research. Why would you even be picking a school if you didn't know it was better than whatever your child was going to? So I couldn't imagine that someone would pick a failing school by choice.
I understand what you're saying, but it's not always that simple because that's kind of assuming that all parents are familiar with the program, that they understand what it means. Some parents don't. Some parents might get approached and they say, hey, we have these vouchers for your children to go to school for free. And it may seem like a better option at the time, but it may not be. So you understand what I'm saying? So if the parent is not familiar with how school systems are supposed to work, they're like, oh my God, I think this is a better school. Let me get my child in that school. Only because it's another option. And because the schools their children are going to now, it's failing. They think, okay, well, maybe if my child go to this, I mean, this is kind of like the trick that
Well,
kind of happened.
but
Go ahead.
if you think about what you just said, though, that's
Mm-hmm.
understandable too. I don't want to. I'm not trying to do a full school choice conversation, if you will. I want to go to another space, just if you don't
Okay.
mind. But I will say to you that even the example you just gave, well, that still makes sense if you're saying that the school ends up not being better, because I can understand that can happen, like you said, because of how it gets promoted, if you will. So what you're saying, I can see how that happens, but I also understand the parent doing that. If you're telling me that the school they're already at is known as a dropout factory or known as a bad school, then if you end up at a charter school that's not better, that's unfortunate.
It's unfortunate.
But, yeah, it is unfortunate, but I wouldn't make a case against that parent doing that, since they do know, because what they do know is the school that they can easily go to via zip code. That's the one they got knowledge about, and they know that's bad. So you're gonna definitely throw something against the wall and hope it sticks if you just even don't research the other school. Now, what I will tell you, in my experience with certain schools that get known, then they have everybody's trying to be in their lottery. So when a school does get known for being successful, you know what I mean, then there's those advocates for, let's get some of these students, in these schools. What I used to always say is, well, what about the students that left behind? And I'm saying that only because people are offering this political solution, and we're not being honest about the fact that our public school system is failing us from this standpoint. My guest on the show said this as an example. He just kind of used this as an analogy, but he was like, our public school systems are running at about 40%. If they were an engine, they're running. He just kind of threw this analogy out there. He said they're running at about a 40% efficiency. And he was just like, the government can't do something better than private schools can. And it's not that I disagree with what he's saying specifically. I'm challenging that we're offering a political solution as if it's going to help the majority of kids, because the reality is it's only going to be so many vouchers. And it's not so much that I'm arguing against vouchers. It's more the full acknowledgement that whether you're on the left or the right of the school choice argument is acknowledging that there are too many failing schools. And once we acknowledge that, then just simply shipping children out is being offered, and it's basically us giving up on the public schools as a country. Like, we're giving up on it as a country. Like, I had another guest, Baba Amin, and this is something that if you get stuck on a political side, a lot of times you'll miss your actual interests. So there's like Brother Baba Amin, who started his own independent schools. I was in Brother Malik Shabazz High School up in New Jersey. He turned it around years ago. And when I meet brothers like that who run their own schools, politically, African Americans are typically fall on Democrats who are against school choice. But when I run into those actual educators, they actually advocate for school choice because they want to get their hands on that funding to better their school in particular. So I'm highlighting that because a lot of times we'll put things on a political side and it ain't black and white like that, because those educators who do give a damn about our children who are in leadership positions, they're begging for school choice, whereas we line up with a political party and vote against our best interests if the reality is we don't have an answer for improving these schools. Because what's been proven over the last 15 or 20 years is you can't just simply throw money at the problem. They've been dumping a bunch of money into education, and a lot of these schools still haven't come up. So if it isn't as simple as dumping money, if that makes sense, and then I meet educators who run schools, our community to a degree sides, with the limo Democrat. I'm talking about to a degree, a lot of us do, and that's voting against school choice. But when I meet the people that care about our kids the most, they want school choice. And I'm saying that's the reality based on how things are. So go ahead and give me your thoughts on that, Queen.
My thoughts on that is, it's not. I think school choice is a great thing, but it's just one thing. It's just one aspect of it, because you have to think like what all contributes to a school district, right? So you have school districts that don't need school choice. So taxes and things like that, they pay for school districts. So your funding sources was going to be a big deal when it comes to it, and how they spread the money out. So your teachers, the administration, it's going to be a lot of different things that contribute to that. So in a lot of you want to call it quote unquote urban cities, you're going to have a lot more failing schools because they don't have the funding, they don't have the resources that you need to maintain these school districts. Also, they have crime, they have other things that these students have to deal with. So it's not just I can go to a better school. It's not just it's not just the government putting money in there, but these kids go through things at home. So you have social economics, you have all different type of things that go into it. So it's bigger than just just government throwing money in there, and it's bigger than just, okay, I'm gonna put my child in another school, because kids can learn anywhere. Children can learn anywhere. It's kind of based on what happens at home, the type of if your family is big on education or if they're not big on education, what they've been taught, their history, the dynamics in the household. Is it violence? Is it quiet? Do they have, do they do their homework? It's a lot of things that go into this. So I wouldn't just say um just one thing, one aspect of it, because you have certain neighborhoods, them kids don't even get no sleep at night. And you have certain neighborhoods where the kids get great sleep every night, so it's like you really trying. I think it depends on what the goal is. It
Well,
depends
like
on.
I said, for me, the challenge is for both political parties to acknowledge some of the reality of what you're talking about.
Okay.
I think the political narrative is discussed without acknowledging that. And to me, the proof in them not acknowledging that is that there's this big push to get rid of, for example, affirmative action at the college. Not that everybody's going to go to college, right?
Right.
But 38% of the country goes to college, right? And so for those that are looking to go to higher education, there's this push to get rid of, for example, affirmative action, despite the realities that a lot of kids are in some of the situations you just talked about. And I'm like, how does that go together? It would go to, like, affirmative action, if you want to call it equality, would make sense if we figured out a way to make primary education equal. You see what I'm saying? Like at that point, it would make sense. But I'm just saying, because of political narratives, we basically compete. We have a competing issue. We want to get rid of affirmative action because it's not fair. Like, okay, you can make that argument, but it makes sense if primary education was on equal footing.
Sure.
So, but school choice is proof in itself that primary educations are not. So I'm talking about, if we're honest about the fact that they're not. Did you see them? You see what I'm saying? Like that.
I understand.
Yeah, like we just run down political narratives, but they're competing interests. Because we're not honest about what's happening at the education level. Like the guest I had on Saturday, they all felt like the question I asked on Saturday's show was public school education, benefit or detriment to Black children. One educator in the system for 30 years, another one independent teacher with his own school, and another guest was a consultant for these schools. They all three sided that public school is a detriment mostly for African American children. Like, you know what I'm saying? That's why in and out the system, they think of it as a detriment to African American children because, one, they won't see themselves. But the other bigger issue, not so much them not seeing themselves and focused on history, if you will, but the bigger expectation, the bigger issue is the expectations that, unfortunately, even plenty of the teachers have, whether they're Black or white, that they have of the children. And I'm saying, in a lot of these neighborhoods, there's a history of those low expectations. And that history typically has come in areas where there's, like some of the stuff you just talked about, where kids are having to deal with a whole much more than they would in a zip code where, like you said, the public school itself is fine. And so, again, it's just me dialoguing through the idea of people put it in a political issue and just don't, in my opinion, own the fact that that political issue does not solve the real issue. And not only does it not solve the real issue, but it's us as a nation conceding that we're going to just keep these failing schools, in my opinion. But, give me your thoughts, Queen. Anybody else, if you want to jump on, please hit the link as well.
Okay, so even it takes me back to even if you have school choice, right? If it's not proven, because a lot of times these schools come in, right? People start developing schools and they start to say, okay, come to my school. We offer this, we offer that, but they don't have the same resources as these top, these top schools. Then they're going to still be considered as probably not doing as well. So when people don't know how to look for thriving schools, so if the parents have to be educated on what type of school it is, um, what are they teaching, what is the structure, what's the curriculum, what does my child need to learn to be successful in this school. It doesn't matter if it's a public school, it doesn't matter if it's a charter school, it doesn't matter if it's a private school. They still have to do their due diligence to know what's going on. So if they don't know what to look for, their child could still fail. So say for instance, when my son was in school, my brother, before he got to high school, my son said, hey, Samira, you need to make sure that your son take these courses, because if he doesn't, he can end up in school longer, or he can fail. It was different things that he told me about. So it's certain paths that they need to take while they're in high school, because a lot of people don't know that your GPA really starts to accumulate, become cumulative when they get into the 9th grade. That's when everything goes up to like 12th grade. That's how you get into college. So when you it's certain classes you need to take in order to be more successful in school, which I found to be really great for my son. However, you're talking about, that can't be the only answer. In my opinion, that can't be the only answer. It's a great option. It's a great opportunity for people who really need that. But really, it needs to be that. And okay, one thing you said was, as far as being fair, right? If everything was equal and everything was fair across the board, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? So if we know that it's not, so some schools have higher budgets than other schools. Some schools get more money sent to them than other schools. They have more resources. Just like some schools are going to have robotics, they're going to have like engineering programs. They're going to have just they like state of art programs in them. Where most I'm gonna say urban public schools don't have that, because suburban public schools have a lot of those things. So they're not missing out on the things that a lot of black students, black kids are missing out on if they live in an urban, quote unquote, urban, area.
Yeah, no
So I
doubt.
think, so it really depends on what part are you talking about, because
Well,
yeah,
I was just talking. I
not
was
you,
talking
but a
about.
person, like somebody. So say for instance, when you said your guest was saying that certain schools are a detriment to to our kids. And I would have to agree, certain schools are a detriment to our children. But think about it. It depends on your earning. It depends on the family, what they earn. It depends on the location where they live. It depends on like what you understand and what you know about the school districts. It depends on if you even care about education. It depends on so many things. And just going having another option, that's just one thing of it. Because
Right. I'm not advocating. Like I think you think. I mean, I don't know. Just the way we're dialoguing.
mm-mm,
I'm not even advocating for what I'm just talking about the concept of that this issue exists without the political parties acknowledging ultimately what's happening at the schools. So they sell us the people political narratives to side with without acknowledging the overall issue, in my opinion.
sure. Well, that
So,
means they
you
have
know,
to fix
so
the problem. That means they have to start trying to fix the problem, or at least trying to find out what the problem is, right? So
who's
they
they?
have
When you say
to,
they, because I'm
the
thinking that.
government. So
Yeah, see, I think
whoever,
they're offering the political narratives that are far away from trying to solve the problem. So
right.
I'm saying that what they're doing is avoiding it.
Mhm.
That's what I'm trying to suggest. And I don't know, maybe I'm not being clear. Well, yeah, because again, for me, I'm not caught up in whether school choice is good or not. Like that's not
Right.
even.
Right. So I'm kind of piggybacking what you're saying. If they, if in order to fix the problem, you have to kind of determine what the problem is, right? So if they're going outside of that and they're doing other things, not trying to figure out the problem is, then that means that that's not their interest, right? So that's not their interest. They're going to find other things to kind of avoid it. But
Yeah, and I'm telling you, the political narratives they're pushing down our throat is clearly avoiding their interests or whatever,
that's
because
sad.
it's not an acknowledgement to why this school has been this way for a lot of times. Some of these schools have been this way for 20, 30, sometimes 40 years. So I'm saying they're offering a quote unquote political solution that has nothing to do with what's happening in these areas over time. Because reality, if this school has, for let's say 20 years, I don't want to exaggerate it, but let's say for 20 years this school has been lowly rated, are we surprised that the most of that neighborhood that end up having to go to that high school in that zip code is not really highly educated? Like, why would we be surprised at that? You know what I mean? And it's not, but those parents care about their kids' education just like somebody else in the other zip code. But we get offered a political narrative such as school choice as if there are some parents who don't care about education. That's not normal. Most parents care just the same. However, like George Fraser, I mentioned this, and I don't want to keep belaboring this point. I didn't say it to you, so I'll say it to you just so you to hear it. Like he said, it's a shame that a lot can be determined based on the zip code you're born in. Like that can be the outcome. So the zip code alone. And I'm just simply saying that we have a political narrative that supposedly is offering a solution, but does not acknowledge what took place in some of those zip codes that it includes not just what happens with the school itself, but over the years, whether that neighborhood has been deindustrialized over the years, like, you know, like me knowing where you're from, that happened in the Midwest. A lot of those cities lost a lot of their main industries, you know, over time or whatever. And whatever. And so if you go from, 30, 40 years ago, that high school education could get you a good job in that industry. That industry's now gone. So it didn't, at that time, the school didn't necessarily need to elevate. You just needed to get through the school and be just fine in that neighborhood. But you take that away, and now that, some of those same neighborhoods become destitute. And then 20 years later, you're talking about, why do we have affirmative action? You're literally talking out the side of your neck. So that, you know what I'm saying? So that, that was just
when they know why we have affirmative action. I mean, it's, I can't say it's clear, but to me it's clear. I look at it from the standpoint of, okay, so let's use the choice program again, right? If it's only, okay, so the government can afford to pay another school to come in, right, and take our children and educate them and stuff like that. That means the funding obviously is there. So instead of finding out what is the detriment, what is causing the problems in the school, you say, okay, we're just going to put a whole other school there, and hopefully they can be successful at this school. That's not really answering that's really not answering the problem, because that school may be identical to the school they just left, or they may offer one extra thing. So this school may offer, we can teach you how to speak Spanish. They might offer one extra thing. So it may be more of a detriment. You know what I'm saying? Because think about it. We talking about culture. It has the culture of the school. It depends on what your child is used to seeing and used to being around. It depends on so many factors. I'm gonna stop saying that, but just offering another school doesn't work. What happens is what the schools offer that helps. So they need to look at the thriving schools, the ones that are thriving. Number one, the teachers, how the teachers teach, how the students learn, right? Because everybody don't learn the same. How is the administration? How do they interact with the children? Do they have sports? Do they have arts? Do they have things that's going to engage with the children? Can they still go outside for recess? Because recess used to be a big thing in schools. A lot of schools taking it out now. Do the children have to walk to school? Are they getting breakfast in the morning? Are they getting lunch? It's certain things that they need in order to go to school and have a good day. Are the teachers nitpicking with the students? Do they have only a certain type of teacher that they have at the schools where the children don't necessarily learn that well from? It's so many things that come along with being in school. Do the teachers have positive attitudes? Do they say you can do this versus, okay, you're gonna be like everybody else in the streets? In our schools,
So what I would say, just to the in a sense, to the point, I would say that the reality is, since this is how our system is, then I would challenge our community to, unfortunately, I'm not a fan of this, but I would challenge our community to get on board with school choice as it is currently laid out. Because what the one thing that you did say that I agree with is they're not concerned with the why. So if they're not concerned with the why, the current situation is not going to be fixed. And I feel like there are plenty of education in public independent educators who would get more funding if we could get more school choice. So since we know those educators care about our children, I want to make sure they're getting as much funding as possible, because quite often the gap between sometimes a parent getting their child in a culturally relevant school is the cost. And so if that school now has a chance to get those vouchers, then they could easily send them, for example, like some of the African-centered schools that we were highlighting on Saturday, Oru Academy, Colombo Academy. So there's opportunity. And I'm just challenging the idea within our community as school is constantly constituted and how it happens, then we end up in that area quite often voting against our interests as a group, as a collective. So that's the challenge. So I kind of laid out in the beginning how school choice in itself is admitting failure. So I'm not necessarily a fan of just allowing those schools to stay failing. But it's not, obviously, if it was very simple, a lot of those schools would be fixed. Like when I talked to Principal Mills and everything he went through to turn, Malik Shabazz around in New Jersey, like when you hear his stories, like he's teaching other principals how to turn around a school. And he's a huge advocate of school choice because he wants access to more of that funding. So since that is the reality, then again, this was just a dialogue to realize that some of our political extremes are not always in our best interest. And in this situation, a political extreme is if you just simply side politically one way or the other. In this situation, we say we care about our children's education. And the reality is if in a lot of our majority Black cities, we're voting in a sense Democratic who's against school choice, and you have limited access to school choice, and you also have the schools that we know care most about our schools, those independent educators who would like to get access to those funds. So I just wanted to point out those realities of not necessarily to tell people which way to think, but that's a reality that I feel like is often not considered when we simply just stick with the political narrative and vote our party's platform, if you will, not realizing here's an issue based on the way things are currently constituting that are actually hurting your kids. So that was just the thing that I wanted to break down, because I don't think people have heard a lot of what I just said. And I learned that from those educators who are advocating for school choice so they could get more funding. So it's not so expensive to send our children to a culturally relevant school.
No, I agree with everything you just said. I agree with. And I think I might have missed the first 10 to 15 minutes when I came on. So if the funding is going to go to educators that have that pretty much have a curriculum to help the culture to improve what is missing in the schools, I agree with that. So say for instance Afrocentric children may understand, and that's to our children, they're going to understand us better. So of course I think that's fantastic. I also think that if they're able to do so, they should absolutely. I think that's a great thing, and I think that would kind of balance things a little bit too, because right now we don't have that. But I would say, knowing some of the schools that tried to start that here, it's high compliance. So I'll just give my opinion on that. If they decide to do that, they need to know that they're going to have high compliance. They're going to be audited a lot more than any other school is going to be audited. They're going to be under the microscope constantly. So not to deter them, just to let them know to watch out for that, because this is what happens. So they need to know that it's a great thing, and families, whether educated or not, whether they know it's a good thing or not, once they hear that they're relatable to their children, they will. I think most families would go with that, whether they understand it or not.
Yep. And so that's where quite often I'll get into the challenge of politics is local. And so I hate that any of us are beholden to either party, if you will, right? So what I just talked about might require you voting across a party line based on locally, knowing, all right, our neighborhood does have this badass school for all these years. So that might require locally, maybe, you know what I'm saying, maybe statewide, you still vote for your party, but locally, can you move off your party, right, to get something that's in your interest? But
Absolutely.
if you don't move off your party, we accuse others of not voting in their interest. Well, if our kids are so important to us, in that situation, sometimes you're clearly not voting in your interest because you just rock with your party who's against something that you know, this school over here that you've heard about that you wish you could get your kid in, but you can't afford. You might want to vote different, and that's the dialogue that I'm having, you know, with this discussion. So thank you so much, Queen, for jumping on. I think I beat the idea, in kind of a dead horse. But I was just hoping that I really help people navigate that political narratives will have you not understanding an issue fully. And if you don't understand the issue fully, quite often you'll rock with a platform and not actually vote in your interests. And that was kind of part of what I was wanting to dialogue about that I missed saying on Saturday with my guests, and I would have loved to have heard their 3 cents on it. But thank you so much for joining me. That's what we are. We are a live interactive podcast, so you can always jump on and join me anytime. Thank you for your 3 cents this morning, Sam. I mean, I'm so used to tonight. I'm saying tomorrow, I'm so used to my Saturday show tonight. So I'm gonna end the show the way I always do. I'm gonna share a piece from my upcoming book. I've renamed it the Re-Education of the Negro. So I'm gonna put you in the background, Sam, and you can stay on, but then you just won't be on camera. And I'm gonna read this piece, and I'm out of here. So this piece is called Black Socrates Speaks: The Browning of America. Is America designed to hold African Americans down? At the heart of America, people would like to believe no, but when answering this question, we typically skirt around the truth in order to be politically correct. I always say political correctness is going to be the death of our free society as we know it. At the core of our free society is freedom of speech, and of our inalienable rights we see its importance by the fact our founding fathers placed it first in the Bill of Rights. The right to dissent propelled our country from its hypocritical history of limited rights for only a select few to the motto of freedom for the world to admire. In our vast melting pot is truly a land of immigrants. The Liberty Bell rings loudly, but for many African Americans, the crack is still there. Therefore, it rings cautiously. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy issued Executive Order 10925 that required government contractors take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed without regard of their race, creed, color, or national origin. This was the birth of affirmative action, and since that time, it has gone through several transformations in America's courtroom. Currently, we are awaiting the Supreme Court's decision in Fisher versus University of Texas, the most recent case in the long saga of affirmative action cases. Oral arguments were heard on October the 10th, 2016, and based on the court's makeup, they are expected to rule against affirmative action in college admissions. If this is the case, this will effectively be the death of affirmative action after 51 years of existence. The decision will be based on the political correct buzzword of fairness, despite the unfairness of minority students disproportionately graduating from high schools known as dropout factories. There are those who tout voucher programs, but vouchers absolutely do nothing to address the failing school itself. The commonalities in all these failing schools are large minority populations. Now imagine if boys and girls had to go to separate schools for their entire primary education, including high school, but most of the girls were stuck in dropout factories. There wouldn't be a Supreme Court case brought forward addressing fairness in college admissions without addressing the unfair starting point of the young ladies trapped in those dropout factories. There are studies that show once minority students are placed into higher education, they significantly close the achievement gap in their 4 years of college. Although a recent study conducted at Duke University attempted to disprove this theory by stating minorities avoid the harder majors to close the gap. This study was also sent to the Supreme Court and archived this information even before the court decided to hear the Fisher versus University of Texas case. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but how convenient. Why wouldn't I look at this as a concerted effort to protect the privileged position, but disguised under fairness? No one ever discusses, for example, the biggest trump card on any college application more so than race, religion, extracurricular activities, etc., and that's the children of alumni. Outside of historically Black colleges and university, what's the likelihood of those students being minorities? Therefore, students of alumni inherently are a protected benefit of the majority, and the browning of America only scares those who have systemically had a stranglehold on privilege thus far. Hopefully, the Supreme Court pays attention to the 50 major corporations, including American Express, Pfizer, Walmart, and Kraft Foods, who recently came out with the unified brief in support of affirmative action for college admissions. So I wrote this back in 2016, and as a sidebar, the Supreme Court actually did hold up the University of Texas use of affirmative action in a 4-3 decision. So I wrote this prior to them making that decision, and they ended up upholding it to my surprise based on the makeup of the courts. But again, these are just pieces that hopefully make you think, and that's all we want to do. So hopefully you enjoyed tonight's discussion and enjoyed that piece. We're out. I salute y'all. Check us out next Wednesday or Thursday. Again, Wednesday or Thursday, the Just My 3 Cents podcast. I'm out.